You're 43 years old. It's a Tuesday night, and you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Your phone just lit up with another notification from your banking app. One of those helpful little reminders that your checking account balance has dipped below $1,000. Again. And as you lie there, you're doing that thing we all do sometimes. That quiet mental math where you add up your car payment, your mortgage, your kids' activities, and realize that somehow, despite making more money than you ever have in your life, you feel more financially stuck than ever. Here's what nobody tells you about your 40s. This decade doesn't determine how rich you'll be. It determines how calm your future feels. And those are two very different things. My name is James, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about money. Not just the mechanics of it, but the psychology of it. The way financial decisions shape our lives in ways we don't see until years later. What I've discovered is that your 40s represent a kind of fork in the road that most people walk right past without noticing. The path you choose in this decade quietly determines whether the next 20 years of your life feel controlled or reactive. Whether you wake up at 60 with options or with obligations. If you find yourself nodding along to any of this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This channel is about helping people like you see money differently. And if this video helps shift your perspective even a little bit, that like button lets me know I should keep making content like this. Now let me tell you why your 40s are so different from every other decade. Most people assume that building wealth is about making more money. And look, income matters. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. But here's what the data actually shows. According to recent Federal Reserve surveys, about half of Americans perceive themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. And here's the surprising part. It's not just lower-income households. Bank of America research shows that even among higher-income households, lifestyle creep is often the main driver of financial stress. You bought a house, you bought a couple of cars, and before you know it, all your money is going out to bills. This is the paradox of the 40s. You're probably earning more than you ever have, but you're also spending more than you ever have. And the gap between those two numbers? That's what actually determines your future. Let me paint two pictures for you. Path A looks successful on paper. High income, nice house in a good school district, 2 newer cars in the driveway, maybe a country club membership or some premium subscriptions you barely use. But underneath that surface, every dollar is spoken for. Your fixed costs eat up 70 or 80% of what you bring home. When something unexpected happens, and something always happens, you either put it on a credit card or you dip into whatever small savings cushion you've managed to build. You're not broke, but you're not free either. You're financially stuck in what behavioral economists call a scarcity mindset, constantly juggling upcoming expenses, always aware of the next bill, the next payment, the next financial obligation. Path B looks less impressive from the outside. Maybe you drive a car that's a few years older. Maybe your house is a little smaller than what you could technically afford. But here's what's different. You have margin. 20 or 30% of your income isn't already committed to fixed costs. When opportunities arise, whether that's an investment, a career move, or just the chance to take unpaid time off for something important, you can actually say yes. You're not constantly operating in survival mode. You're building. And here's what most people miss. The difference between these two paths isn't usually income, it's decisions. Specifically, the decisions you make in your 40s about your fixed costs. Let me get specific about why this decade is so different. When you're in your 20s or 30s, you have time on your side. You can make financial mistakes and recover from them. Save nothing until you're 32? You've still got 30 plus years of compounding ahead of you. Take a career risk that doesn't pan out? You've got decades to course correct. But in your 40s, the math starts to change. Not because it's too late, it's absolutely not, but because every decision compounds forward in a more concentrated way. You still have time, but you don't have infinite resets anymore. Consider this. The historical average annual return of the S&P 500 over the past several decades has been roughly 10%, including dividends. But that growth doesn't help you if you're not participating in it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. According to Vanguard's research on retirement savings, the average 401k balance for Americans in their 40s is somewhere around $150,000. Now, some people have much more, and some have much less. That's just the median. But what jumps out when you look at this data is how far below what most savers think they'll need it actually is. Northwestern Mutual research shows Americans believe they need about $1.26 million to retire comfortably. There's a massive gap between where most people are and where they want to be. The question is, what closes that gap? It's not a hot stock tip. It's not cryptocurrency or real estate speculation. What closes that gap is something much more boring and much more powerful. It's the decisions you make about your monthly overhead. Let me give you some numbers that might surprise you. The average new car payment in America right now is about $750 per month, according to Experian data. If you're financing a used car, you're looking at around $530. That's for one car. Most households have two. So let's say you're paying $1,400 a month between two car payments. Over a typical 6-year loan period, that's over $100,000 just in car payments. Now imagine if instead of the new SUV and the sedan, you bought reliable used cars with cash. Something 5 or 6 years old that you could own outright. That $700 difference per month, invested in a simple index fund averaging even a conservative 7% real return after inflation, would grow to over $100,000 in 10 years. That's one decision. Cars. Just cars. Now let's talk about housing. According to the Census Bureau and recent Federal Reserve data, homeowners with a mortgage are spending a median of about 21% of their income on housing costs. But that's the median. In high-cost areas, families are spending 30, 40, even 50% of their income just on housing. The Department of Housing and Urban Development defines anyone spending more than 30% of their income on housing as cost-burdened. And recent data shows that over 50% of renter households and nearly a quarter of homeowners with mortgages fall into that category. Here's what this means in practical terms. If you locked yourself into a house at the top of what you could afford at age 38, you might be stuck paying for that decision until you're 68 or beyond. Every month, that oversized mortgage payment takes dollars that could be compounding and sends them to the bank instead. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying you should never buy a nice car or live in a nice house. What I'm saying is that the 40s are when these decisions start to have permanent consequences. The financial choices you make now don't just affect next month's bank balance. They ripple forward into your 50s and 60s and determine whether you enter those decades with options or with obligations. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your brain when you're under financial stress. This is where it gets really interesting. Researchers in behavioral economics, including some influential work by Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, have documented something they call the scarcity mindset. When people feel like they don't have enough, whether it's time, money, or any other resource, their brains start to operate differently. They develop what researchers call tunneling, this intense focus on immediate problems that makes it harder to think about long-term consequences. Think about it this way. When your car breaks down and you don't have an emergency fund, your brain goes into firefighting mode. All your mental energy is focused on, how do I pay for this repair right now? You're not thinking about your retirement savings. You're not thinking about career opportunities. You're just trying to survive until next Friday. But here's what's fascinating. This effect isn't just about being objectively poor. It's about the feeling of scarcity, the subjective perception that your resources aren't enough for your demands, which means that someone earning $150,000 a year but spending $145,000 can experience the same cognitive narrowing as someone earning far less. The scarcity mindset doesn't just make you feel bad, it actually impairs decision-making. Research suggests that financial stress consumes mental bandwidth, leaving fewer cognitive resources for thinking about other challenges and opportunities. People in this state tend to make more short-term focused decisions, sometimes over-borrowing or delaying important financial steps because they can't think beyond the immediate crisis. And this brings me to one of the most important points about your 40s. The goal isn't just to have more money. The goal is to have enough margin that your brain can shift out of survival mode and into growth mode. When you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in an emergency fund, something incredible happens. You stop flinching every time your phone buzzes. You stop lying awake doing mental math about whether you can afford to fix the furnace. That cognitive load, that constant low-grade stress, it lifts, and suddenly you have mental space for other things, for thinking strategically about your career, for noticing opportunities you would have been too stressed to see, for being present with your family instead of constantly worried about money. According to the Federal Reserve's latest survey on household economic well-being, only about 55% of Americans have set aside enough to cover 3 months of expenses in an emergency fund. That means nearly half of American adults are one bad month away from crisis. And here's what makes this so tragic. Building an emergency fund is one of the highest return investments you can make. Not in terms of interest earned, but in terms of stress reduced and opportunities captured. The psychological return on having 6 months of expenses sitting in a boring savings account is enormous. It changes how you walk through the world. Let me talk about what happens when you do build that cushion. When you create some margin in your life, suddenly you have what I call walkaway money. Not enough to retire, but enough that you don't have to take the first offer that comes along. Enough that you can negotiate from strength instead of desperation. Think about how this plays out in your career. Let's say your boss asks you to do something that violates your ethics, or your company starts going in a direction you don't believe in, or you get a job offer that requires relocation but offers real growth potential. If you're living paycheck to paycheck with no savings, you have no leverage. You have to say yes to things you don't want and no to opportunities you do want, simply because you can't afford the financial disruption. But if you have 6 months of expenses saved, if your monthly overhead is low enough that you could survive a gap in employment, everything changes. You can push back on that unreasonable demand. You can take the calculated risk on the new opportunity. You can invest in yourself, maybe pay for a certification or attend a conference on your own dime, because you're playing offense instead of defense. This creates a positive feedback loop. Better financial position leads to more confidence, which leads to better career decisions, which leads to better financial position. The people who feel stuck in their careers are often the same people who feel stuck in their finances, and it's not a coincidence. The one feeds the other. Now, let's talk about the mistakes. The traps that people fall into that quietly destroy years of progress. Trap number 1, lifestyle creep. You get a raise, and within 6 months, your expenses have risen to match. Your lifestyle inflates to consume whatever income you have. Research from multiple financial institutions consistently shows that higher income households often have the same financial stress as middle income households, because their spending scales up alongside their earning. The antidote to lifestyle creep is what I call the 50% rule. Whenever you get a raise, automatically redirect at least half of it to savings or investments before you adjust your lifestyle. Let your lifestyle improve, sure, but let your savings improve faster. Trap number 2, using savings milestones as spending rewards. You hit $50,000 in your retirement account and you celebrate by buying a boat. You build up your emergency fund and then you use it for a vacation. I understand the impulse, I really do. You worked hard for that money. But the point of building savings isn't to have money to spend, it's to have money working for you. Every time you treat your nest egg as a piggy bank, you reset the clock on compounding. Trap number 3, housing upgrades. This is the big one. You have some equity in your current house. Rates were low for a while, so maybe you refinanced or upgraded. Now you're sitting in a house that's worth more, sure, but you're also paying a bigger mortgage payment every month for the next 30 years. According to recent analysis, the typical family would need to spend 38% of their income to cover mortgage payments on a median-priced new home. That's assuming they can even qualify. For many Americans, especially in high-cost metros, housing costs have become the single biggest barrier to building wealth. Trap number 4, car decisions. I already mentioned the average car payment of $750 for new vehicles. But let me put this in starker terms. Nearly 20% of new car buyers are now committing to monthly payments of $1,000 or more. More than 22% are taking out 84-month loans. That's 7 years, just to make the numbers work. By the time you pay off a 7-year car loan, you often have little to no equity in the vehicle, and you're likely ready for another one. It becomes a treadmill that never stops. Here's what I want you to understand. These aren't moral failures. Taking on a big car payment or buying more house than you need. These are normal things that normal people do. Our entire economy is designed to encourage them. But normal isn't the same as optimal. And in your 40s, when your decisions have outsized consequences for the next 2 decades of your life, it's worth asking whether you want to do what's normal or what actually serves your future self. So what should you do instead? Let me give you some principles, not prescriptions, because your situation is unique, and I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just someone who's thought a lot about this. First, know your number. Not your income, your savings rate. What percentage of your take-home pay are you actually keeping? Financial experts often recommend saving 15% of your income for retirement alone. But most Americans are saving less than 5% of their income right now. The gap between those numbers is where stress comes from. You don't have to hit 15% tomorrow, but you should know where you are and have a plan to move the needle. Second, prioritize lowering fixed costs over increasing income. I know that sounds backwards, but here's the thing. $1 saved from your fixed monthly overhead is worth more than $1 earned, because it's after tax and it's permanent. If you can reduce your monthly nut by $500, That's the equivalent of earning 6,000 or 7,000 more per year, every year, forever. And unlike a raise, which you might spend, a reduced expense actually stays in your pocket. Third, automate everything. The research on willpower is clear. It's a limited resource. If you rely on motivation to save money every month, you'll fail. But if you set up automatic transfers to your savings and investment accounts on payday, before you ever see the money, it happens without requiring any willpower at all. This isn't about being more disciplined. It's about building systems that don't require discipline. Fourth, think in opportunity costs. Every major purchase has a shadow cost, the alternative use of that money. When you buy a $45,000 car, you're not just spending $45,000. You're giving up what that money could have become. Over 20 years at 7% real returns, that's over $170,000. I'm not saying never buy a nice car. I'm saying know what it actually costs. Fifth, protect your margin relentlessly. Once you build some buffer between your income and your expenses, guard it. This is the single most valuable financial asset you can have in your 40s, more valuable than any investment or any income level. Margin is what gives you options. Margin is what lets you sleep at night. Every financial decision you make should be evaluated through the lens of whether it protects or erodes your margin. Here's what it comes down to. Your 40s are a turning point, but they're not a deadline. You still have time to make meaningful changes. You still have decades of potential compounding ahead of you. But the window for easy fixes is closing. The decisions you make in this decade will echo forward into your retirement in ways that the decisions you made in your 20s simply didn't. Stress isn't caused by not enough. It's caused by exposure, by having too little buffer between you and the next financial disruption. Reduce that exposure, and the future becomes quieter. Build some margin between your income and your expenses, and you'll be amazed at how differently you experience your life. I know this video covered a lot of ground, and I know that changing financial direction in your 40s can feel daunting when you've got kids and mortgages and careers and all the complexity of middle adult life. But here's what I want you to take away. Small changes compound too. You don't have to revolutionize your financial life overnight. You just have to start making decisions that serve your 60-year-old self instead of just your today self. So let me ask you this, and I genuinely want to hear from you in the comments. What's one financial decision you made in your past that you would do differently if you could go back? What would you tell your younger self about money? Drop that in the comments below. I read every single one, and I think we can learn a lot from each other's experiences. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button. It really does help the channel. And if you want more content like this, about the psychology of money, about building real financial security instead of just chasing income, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Your 40s aren't the end of your financial story. They're the chapter where you decide how the story ends. Make it a good one.